My name is Natalie Thorne. I am 36 years old. 2 decades ago, my parents threw me onto the street because I got pregnant during my sophomore year of high school. I was 16. It was a freezing November downpour, and I had only a single nylon suitcase to my name. My mother stood on the threshold, her finger pointed directly into the dark, telling me that as far as she was concerned, I was dead. That very night, they had an attorney draft paperwork, severing every legal and familial tie to me, and any descendant I would ever bring into the world. I held on to those documents. I held on to every scrap of proof. For 20 years, I ceased to exist in their world. They informed their social circle that I had relocated overseas, constructing their pristine reputation upon the buried memory of the daughter they discarded. Then, out of nowhere last week, they showed up on my front porch flustered, wearing practiced smiles, demanding to be introduced to their grandson. A grandson they had spent months boasting about to more than 200 of their most prominent associates. They brought out a check for $250,000. They had no idea that the golden boy grandson they had promised their peers did not exist. And what they uncovered instead would dismantle every shred of status they had spent half a century manufacturing. Columbus, Ohio, November 2004. I was 16, a 10th grader in a pleated plaid skirt at St. Jude's Preparatory Academy, and the youngest child of Arthur and Evelyn Thorne. On the surface, our household was the epitome of Midwestern civic distinction. My father ran a lucrative corporate litigation and estate firm in the city center, Thorne and Associates, established back in 1985. My mother served as chairwoman of the Regional Symphony Guild and directed the parish charity auxiliary for 4 terms in a row. Every Sunday morning, without fail, we occupied the second pew at Christ Church on the Hill, wearing color-coordinated wool coats and tailored outfits that my mother laid across our dressers every Saturday evening. Yet every household maintains its hidden pecking order, and I discovered mine before I even hit middle school. Preston, my eldest brother, was 22 and in his 3rd year at the State College of Pharmacy. He was the crown jewel of the Thorne family, the upright son destined to carry the legacy. Mallory, 20, was enrolled in speech pathology, the polished, compliant daughter who never once stepped out of line. And then there was me. My mother frequently referred to me as the unexpected arrival. She had me at 34, 6 years after she believed she was completely finished with childbearing. Deep down, I don't think she ever forgave me for derailing her meticulously plotted schedule. The quiet slights were continuous. The framed silver portraits gracing the mantel above the brick fireplace somehow omitted every single one of my annual school headshots. Our evening meals centered entirely around Preston's clinical rotations or Mallory's upcoming internship placements. Whenever I mentioned earning high honors on my report card, my father would barely glance up from his paper, mutter, "Good job, Natalie," and immediately pivot back to Preston. I learned early on to shrink into the background, never to ask for attention, never to present an inconvenience. My father had a maxim he recited at nearly every dinner party. A sterling reputation takes 20 years to build and 5 minutes to burn to the ground. Back then, I had no concept of how terrifyingly true those words would ring, or that I was the exact 5 minutes he spent his entire life dreading. I met Caleb Mercer at the public library on Broad Street. It might sound mundane, but that quiet brick building was my sanctuary, a place where nobody measured me against Preston or Mallory, and where nobody expected me to perform for social standing. I spent 3 afternoons a week tucked into the study alcoves, pretending to review history notes, but mostly just trying to breathe freely. Caleb went to Westland High, a public comprehensive school that my parents would cross the street to avoid acknowledging. He was 17, worked afternoons turning wrenches at his uncle's diesel repair shop, and possessed the gentlest demeanor I had ever known. He found me sobbing behind the American history stacks one chilly October afternoon after my mother forgot to pick me up from the academy for the 3rd time that semester. "Hey," he whispered gently, sitting on the wooden chair opposite mine. "Are you holding up okay?" Nobody in my house had asked me that question in years. We dated quietly for 2 months. He was thoughtful, steady, and made me feel like an actual human being who deserved to take up space. On the 28th of October 2004, I stood in the cramped, flickering restroom of a gas station 2 miles from campus, staring down at a plastic stick. 2 distinct crimson lines. My fingers shook so violently that the stick clattered against the porcelain sink. When I broke the news to Caleb, he didn't run, nor did he search for an easy out. He clasped my trembling hands inside his worn denim jacket and said, "We're going to handle this together, Natalie. You are not on your own." I desperately wanted to believe him. A part of me did. But I knew the people who raised me. I knew what governed their universe. And I knew that when the truth came out, their first reaction wouldn't be concern for my well-being. It would be horror over public perception. I chose to tell them around the mahogany dining table during Sunday dinner. I had no idea it would be the final meal I would ever share under their roof. Sunday, the 14th of November 2004, precisely 7:32 p.m. The honey-glazed ham had gone dry on the serving platter. That detail remains burned into my memory, because I was staring fixatedly at the porcelain dish, trying to summon the air in my lungs while my father complained about a commercial zoning battle, and my mother reviewed the seating arrangements for the annual parish winter gala. I need to tell everyone something. The silver cutlery stopped clinking. 4 heads snapped in my direction. My parents, Preston home for the weekend, and Mallory visiting from her campus dorm. I was 8 weeks along, and the secret could no longer be kept. I'm pregnant. My mother's crystal water glass hit the tablecloth, spilling across the linen. My father sat completely motionless. Who is responsible for this? His tone was sheer ice. Is it someone from street? Jude's? A family from our congregation? His name is Caleb Mercer. He goes to Westland High. He works with his uncle. The color drained from my mother's face in an instant. You've been sneaking around with a boy from the local public school? He's a decent person, Mom. He cares about me. Does he come from a respectable background? My father interjected, his voice cutting like a blade. What does his family do? He lives with his uncle. He works as a mechanic. The silence that descended on the room stretched for 11 agonizing seconds. I counted every tick of the grandfather clock. Then my father stood up. You will terminate this immediately. Arthur, my mother whispered, her hand rising to her throat. She will not drag this family's name through the gutter, my father said, his gaze fixing on me with absolute detachment, as if I were a blemish on a legal brief that had to be struck from the record. If you choose to carry that child, your connection to this household ends tonight. By 9:15 p.m., I was standing on the wet pavement outside our brick driveway with one battered bag, the freezing autumn rain soaking through my knitted cardigan. It wasn't my father who shoved me past the doorframe, it was my mother. Preston and Mallory watched from the second-story bedroom window. Neither of them took a single step down the staircase to intervene. I walked to the nearest corner store and dialed Caleb's number from a public phone booth, my fingers so cold and rigid that I misdialed twice. He answered on the very first ring. Natalie? What happened? They threw me out. 20 minutes later, his uncle's battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb. Caleb threw the passenger door open before the engine had even settled, wrapped his fleece work coat around my drenched shoulders, and held me tight as I broke down against his chest. I've got you, he kept repeating into my hair. I'm right here. We had no safety net. We had roughly $300 in cash between us, a pickup truck with squealing brake pads, and nowhere to go. That was when Beatrice Callahan changed the course of my life. She was our neighbor from 3 properties down, a 64-year-old retired chemistry teacher, and the only homeowner on our cul-de-sac who never bowed to my father's self-appointed authority. She had witnessed me standing in the pouring rain under the streetlight. She had lived on that lane long enough to grasp exactly what had transpired. Come inside, dear, she told me when I knocked timidly on her porch door just before 10 that night. You stay here as long as you need. We stayed in Mrs. Callahan's spare room for nearly 2 weeks, until Caleb managed to secure a tiny studio apartment across state lines in Chicago, $450 a month above an industrial laundromat that reeked of dry cleaning, solvents, and damp steam. My parents had their law firm draft disinheritance paperwork the very evening they banished me. I know this with absolute certainty because my father sent it 3 days later via certified mail, signature required, handling his 16-year-old daughter like a breach of contract dispute. The notarized document declared that Natalie Jane Thorne relinquished all claims to the Thorne family estate, and that the Thorne family bore neither legal, financial, nor moral responsibility for her, or any descendant she might produce. I locked that paperwork in a metal file. I kept it safe for 20 years. Chloe Thorne Mercer was born on the 6th of July 2005, at Swedish Covenant Hospital in Chicago. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. 10 perfect fingers, 10 perfect toes. She inherited Caleb's deep hazel eyes and my resolute jawline. She entered this world crying at the top of her lungs, and I whispered to her swaddled blanket, "That's right. Let them hear you. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel small." The first 5 years were a grueling test of endurance. Caleb picked up double shifts at an auto body shop near Lincoln Square, while I studied for my high school equivalency diploma at night, eventually enrolling in community college courses 2 credits at a time around Chloe's nursery schedule. We survived on bulk oats, generic pasta, and discounted day-old bread from the corner bakery. I taught myself how to sew reinforced hems into thrifted clothes to make every single dollar stretch beyond its limit. When Chloe was born, I mailed my parents a birth announcement card. No response came. On her first birthday, I sent a color photograph of her sitting on a blanket. Total silence. By her second birthday, I packed away my hopes and stopped reaching out entirely. Caleb and I never had a formal wedding. We kept promising each other that we would hold a real ceremony once we saved enough for a small garden gathering, once life settled into place. But someday kept drifting farther away. Then, on the 15th of March 2010, an overloaded commercial delivery truck blew through a red light on Western Avenue. Caleb was driving back from an overnight repair shift. The patrol officers who arrived at my apartment door informed me that he passed away instantly upon impact. He was 26 years old. Chloe had just turned 4. His employer-provided life insurance policy amounted to exactly $15,000. $15,000 to account for the entire lifetime of a hardworking, selfless young man. I was 22 years old, standing in a rented kitchen with a 4-year-old daughter, $15,000 in the bank, and not a single family member to call for help. I could have crumbled under the weight of it. Instead, I channeled my grief into survival. While Caleb was still alive, I had begun doing small spatial staging projects for neighbors who couldn't afford high-end consultants, helping property managers arrange modest apartments so they showed better to prospective renters. People kept telling me I had an intuitive eye, a natural ability to transform cramped, lifeless rooms into warm, cohesive homes. After losing Caleb, I immersed myself in that work as if my survival depended on it, because it literally did. In 2012, I attended an architectural concepts seminar at the Chicago Design Center and crossed paths with Genevieve Sinclair. She was 54, had recently stepped down as the principal director of a major commercial staging firm, and was looking for raw talent to mentor. For reasons that still humble me, she chose to invest her time in me. "You have a distinct vision," Genevieve remarked while reviewing my rough sketches and Polaroids. "Unrefined, certainly, but fundamentally honest. Let's build on it." By 2014, guided by Genevieve's steady counsel, and backed by a $50,000 small business administration loan that took 3 separate applications to secure, I founded Haven Crest Interiors. Our initial headquarters was a windowless desk inside a communal workspace. By 2018, I had 8 full-time designers on payroll and over $1.3 million in annual contracts. In early 2022, Midwest Design and Lifestyle magazine featured me in a multi-page profile. From overcoming homelessness to design principle. The Natalie Thorne story. The reporter spent 3 full days interviewing me about my path becoming pregnant at 16, getting cast out into the cold, losing Caleb in an instant, and raising a child while building an enterprise from scratch. I laid out the truth of my journey, but I deliberately omitted my parents' names and their hometown. I didn't do it to spare their feelings. I did it to shield Chloe from nosy strangers who might try to link her to a family that never wanted her to draw breath. By 2024, Haven Crest Interiors employed 22 specialists, generated $4.4 million in yearly revenue, and operated out of a high-rise studio overlooking Lincoln Park. My daughter Chloe was 19, an honors sophomore at Northwestern University, studying behavioral psychology. She was brilliant, articulate, and everything I had ever prayed she would grow to be. 20 years of complete absence from the Thorne family until last Tuesday. Tuesday, the 5th of November 2024, 6:47 p.m. I had just driven up to my brick brownstone after concluding an on-site consultation for an $850,000 penthouse renovation off Lakeshore Drive. My mind was still occupied with swatch textures and brass hardware options when I turned into my driveway and froze. Parked against the curb was a pristine black Lexus sedan bearing Ohio license plates. I sat behind the steering wheel for a full 60 seconds, my knuckles white against the leather, watching two figures waiting beside my porch stairs. The man had thin, silvered hair and a slight stoop in his spine. The woman stood with that same rigid, unyielding posture I remembered from childhood, that perpetual tension of someone guarding a fragile illusion against the world. Arthur and Evelyn Thorne. My parents. Standing on my doorstep after 2 decades of silence. My instinct urged me to shift into reverse, check into a downtown hotel, call Chloe, and pretend this day never happened. But I was 36 years old. I owned an established firm. I had built an honorable life without their permission or their money. I was not going to run. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked up the stone pathway. My father spoke first. "Natalie, you look." He hesitated, taking in my tailored wool trench coat, my leather briefcase, the architecture of my home. "You look well. What brings you to my house?" My mother took a half step forward. Her skin was lined with age, and her hair was dyed a precise pearl blonde that looked sharp against her tailored beige coat. "We're aware of your son, Natalie. We know you have a son." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "We want to meet him," my father added smoothly. "We believe it's time to bridge this divide as a family." The sheer audacity of it nearly made me burst out laughing. 20 years of radio silence. 20 years of acting as though I had vanished off the face of the earth. And now they stood on my porch, demanding an audience with a grandson they had never checked on, a grandson who didn't even exist. I opened the front door and let them step into the foyer. To this day, I can't entirely explain why I did. Perhaps I simply needed to witness what 20 years of calculated denial sounded like out loud. My father sat in my living room armchair with the cold detachment of an appraiser, eyeing the white oak flooring, the custom floating bookcases, and the curated gallery frames along the wall. My mother perched stiffly on the edge of the linen sofa, her purse balanced on her knees, her spine straight as an iron rod. "It's your anniversary, isn't it?" I remarked, leaning against the archway. "That's why you're standing in my house." 50 years, my father replied, a sliver of pride touching his mouth. "On November 15th, we are hosting a major celebration at the Grand Ballroom of the Athletic Club downtown. Over 200 attendees. The district judge will be speaking, Pastor Caldwell from Christ Church, the entire hospital charity board." "And what does that have to do with me?" My mother exchanged a brief, calculated look with my father. "People have been asking questions, Natalie. Certain longtime acquaintances from the parish remember that we had a younger daughter. They've been wondering why you're never present. We always explained that you moved far away to pursue creative work, but lately, the inquiries have become much more pointed. So you need me to stand on a stage to prove the Thorne household has no cracks in its foundation?" "We need our grandson," my mother said, her voice turning firm and authoritative. "We have spoken about him to our peers about our talented grandson. He needs to attend, to show the community the next generation of our lineage." The room grew dead silent. "Who told you I had a son?" My father dismissed the question with a flick of his wrist. "We saw that profile in the lifestyle magazine. It referenced your child and your design enterprise. You managed to do far better for yourself than we anticipated. Better than we anticipated. As though my entire existence had been an exam they expected me to fail. And what if I refuse?" My father's jaw set into hard lines. "Let us be reasonable about this, Natalie." He reached into his leather portfolio, pulled out an embossed checkbook, and clicked a gold pen. "We are fully prepared to cover your expenses." He tore out a check and laid it on the walnut coffee table. $250,000. "You bring your boy to the reception, spend 3 hours mingling, take the official family portraits on stage, and you are free to resume your routine." I looked down at the figure written on the paper, then shifted my eyes to my mother, who nodded as if she were offering me a generous settlement in court. $250,000? I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "Is that the going rate to patch over 20 years of abandonment? We are also prepared to amend the family estate trust," my mother added, leaning in and dropping her voice to a conspiratorial hum. "The combined properties and investment holdings are valued at nearly $4 million. You would be written back in for an equal 1/3 split alongside Preston and Mallory. My mind flashed back to that freezing studio apartment over the industrial laundromat. The nights I spent measuring fabric samples at 3 in the morning while Chloe slept in a bassinet behind my drafting desk because I couldn't afford a babysitter. The years of backbreaking labor it took to pull myself up from zero while they relaxed in their suburban estate, pretending I was dead. And if I tell you to leave? My father's tone turned sharp and edged. We would prefer not to contact your son without your involvement, Natalie. But if you force our hand, we have the resources to reach out to him directly. We can arrange a meeting, explain his heritage, and help him understand the opportunities available through the Thorne family. It was a blatant threat, thinly veiled under the guise of family diplomacy. You're threatening to track down my child, I said slowly. To feed them your sanitized version of reality? We simply wish to repair our family, my mother insisted, spreading her hands in an appeal to reason. Isn't that what you have always wanted? Before I could reply, the sound of footsteps echoed from the upstairs hallway, and the air shifted completely. Mom? Is someone here? I heard voices from my room. Chloe paused at the bottom landing, holding a thick neurobiology textbook against her hip. She had on gray athletic joggers and a faded Northwestern crewneck sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled up into a messy bun. She looked like exactly what she was. A 19-year-old college sophomore taking a break from exam preparation. My mother rose from the couch, her expression darting between total confusion, frantic calculation, and sheer panic. Who is this young woman? This is Chloe, I answered, stepping forward to stand beside my daughter. My daughter? Your granddaughter. A daughter? My father's voice cracked at the register. No, that cannot be. The article explicitly stated. The article stated child. I countered. You simply projected what was convenient for your social circle. Chloe's eyes moved from my face to the two elderly figures standing in our living room. I watched the realization wash over her features. These are them, Chloe said, her tone deadpan. The grandparents who dumped you on the street in the rain when you were pregnant with me? My mother visibly flinched. Now wait just a moment. Things were far more complicated back then. Which part was complicated? Chloe crossed her arms, her posture unwavering. The part where you kicked a 16-year-old child out in a storm? Or the part where you spent 19 years acting like she died? Young lady, my father warned, stepping forward. I am not your young lady, Chloe said, her voice ringing clear and steady through the living room, though I could see her knuckles trembling against her sleeves. I'm the granddaughter you erased from your family tree before I was even born. My mother never hid the truth from me. I've seen the disinheritance decree. I know about the certified letters. I know you told your high society church members she was living abroad. My parents stood frozen, completely stripped of their rehearsed composure. Chloe glanced over at me. They came here expecting a grandson to parade in front of their friends, didn't they? Yes, I answered. Chloe turned back to them with an icy smile. Surprise! My father recovered first, his legal training kicking into gear as he rapidly adjusted his strategy. A granddaughter, he murmured, his eyes darting around the room. We can accommodate that. We can adapt the narrative for the gala. Chloe can attend as what? Chloe cut him off sharply. As the hidden granddaughter you kept in the shadows for 2 decades? The proof of the teenage daughter you threw away? We can explain that you were enrolled in an elite private academy in Switzerland, my mother pleaded, her composure fraying at the edges. A triumphant return for our golden anniversary. A joyous family milestone. I was born in a public hospital in Chicago, Chloe replied, letting out a dry, incredulous laugh. I've never even held a European passport. I attend Northwestern on an academic scholarship. Do you hear what you're saying? You want me to stand in front of 200 strangers and fabricate my entire life to protect your social club? The reception is on the 15th, my father said, glancing down at his gold wristwatch, as if running out of billable hours. That gives us 9 days. We expect your confirmation by Sunday evening. I walked toward the front entrance and pulled the door wide open. It's time for you to leave. Natalie, my mother attempted, gathering her leather handbag, please consider what is at stake. This is a chance to put the bitterness behind us. Do not let old grudges ruin what could be a prosperous future. I watched them make their way down the walkway toward their sedan. My father opened the passenger door for my mother, with the same rehearsed courtesy he had performed for decades, as if this were just another polite social call. As their taillights disappeared down the boulevard, Chloe broke the silence. You aren't actually going to accept that check, are you? I looked at my daughter, this fierce, brilliant young woman whom I had raised with my own two hands, the very person Arthur and Evelyn Thorne had attempted to strike from history. No, I replied softly. But we are not finished with them yet. Later that evening, after Chloe went back to studying, I retrieved a heavy fireproof lockbox from the back of my wardrobe. I hadn't unlocked it in nearly a decade. Inside lay the documented history of my erasure. The formal, notarized covenant of disinheritance dated the 14th of November 2004, carrying the signatures of Arthur Vance Thorne and Evelyn Marie Thorne, stamped and witnessed by a notary named Harold Brennan. I still remembered the morning the postman delivered that envelope, requiring my signature, ensuring I understood that their abandonment was legally absolute. The text was 3 pages of dense, unyielding legal terminology, specifically drafted to ensure that Natalie Jane Thorne hereby forfeits all future claims upon the Thorne family estate, and that the Thorne family bears neither financial nor moral obligation to the aforementioned individual, nor to any descendant or issue thereof. Chloe, reduced to an administrative clause, discarded before her heart had even formed completely. I placed each document on my desk, photographed every page in high resolution, uploaded the scans to my secure cloud drive, and printed 3 identical sets. Mom? I looked up. Chloe was standing in the doorway, wrapped in an oversized knit blanket. I can't focus on reading. She walked over and sat on the edge of the desk, looking at the yellowed parchment. Is that the actual deed? It is. She picked up the first page, scanning the legal clauses. When she set it down, her eyes were luminous with anger. They really drew up a contract to pretend we were nothing. They did. What are we going to do with it? I looked at the paperwork, then back at my daughter. I don't know the full shape of it yet, I admitted. But whatever happens, they aren't going to live behind that lie anymore. Chloe gave a slow, deliberate nod. I think I have an idea. The following morning, I placed a call I hadn't made in several years. Beatrice Callahan picked up after 3 rings. Natalie, is that really you, darling? Mrs. Callahan, I smiled, the tension in my chest loosening slightly. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient hour. At 82, no hour is inconvenient. Tell me what's wrong. You sound like you're carrying a heavy load. I recounted everything. My parents' unexpected visit, the fabricated grandson, the $250,000 check, and the upcoming anniversary gala. When I finished, the other end of the line was silent for several seconds. Those dreadful people, Beatrice finally spoke, her voice laced with steel. 20 years later, and they haven't grown an ounce of decency. Mrs. Callahan, I have to ask you something about that night, the 14th of November, 2004. I recall it clearly, she said without hesitation. I was sitting by my front window with my tea. I saw you standing under the rain, holding that small bag. I saw their sedan pull back into the garage and turn off the lamps. I've kicked myself every year since for not walking out to grab you 5 minutes sooner. Do you still maintain those old digital security archives you used to run for the neighborhood association? A brief pause followed. You know I was a science teacher for 35 years, Natalie. I never throw out documentation. Let me open the storage drive. 20 minutes later, an alert chimed on my monitor. An email containing a low-resolution but unmistakable black and white still frame. A 16-year-old girl standing on a soaking curb under a streetlight, holding a suitcase, with the digital timestamp reading 9:17 p.m. Nav 14, 2004. The house number of the Thorne estate was visible in the background. That's the record, Mrs. Callahan said when I called her back. That was the night they locked you out. If you need me to swear to that in front of a room full of people, you just say the word. I've waited 20 years for the truth to catch up with them. Thank you, Beatrice. Truly. 2 primary pieces of proof. 2 direct witnesses. Now, we needed a strategy. I spent that evening reviewing the online footprint of my story. The Midwest Design and Lifestyle article had been shared tens of thousands of times since its publication in 2022. The journalist, Megan Foley, had written 2,500 words detailing resilience, grief, and building a business from ground zero. I had been careful in that piece, sharing my past without naming my hometown or my family. As I scrolled through the older comment sections, one particular thread posted 3 weeks prior caught my attention. Does anyone know if she's related to the Thorne legal family in Columbus? The ones from the Historical Preservation Board? Someone at our parish mentioned a daughter who went missing years ago, and I'm wondering if it's the same person. That was how my parents discovered it. A stray comment from a church member that threatened their social standing. My cell phone rang on the desk. Genevieve Sinclair. Natalie. Word travels quickly through the Midwest design circuit. Someone told me your estranged parents suddenly surfaced after 20 years. I let out a weary laugh. Nothing stays quiet for long. What do you need from me? Genevieve asked, her tone steady and supportive. Advice? Legal representation? A sounding board? I'm trying to decide how to close this chapter once and for all. Just remember, Genevieve said firmly, you spent 20 years building an honorable name without taking a penny from them. Don't let 3 hours of their posturing take that power away from you. I don't plan to, I told her. In fact, I'm thinking much bigger than 3 hours. Thursday afternoon, the 7th of November 2024, at 3:42 p.m., an incoming call from an Ohio area code flashed on my screen. I hesitated before swiping to answer. Natalie. It's Preston. I hadn't heard my brother's voice in 20 years. It sounded deeper, carrying the rasp of a middle-aged man, rather than the 22-year-old graduate student who had watched me through an upstairs window. Preston, I know I have no right to reach out, he began, exhaling heavily. I know you probably hate me. But before anything else happens, there are things you need to know. Go ahead. The grandson's story that came entirely from Mom. She saw that regional magazine article 2 years ago, skimmed the headline about an entrepreneur with a child, and instantly concocted this elaborate fantasy that you had a son who was a successful executive. She started telling everyone at the country club, the church council, her charity board. She manufactured a grandson out of thin air to make it look like our bloodline was thriving. Preston's voice broke slightly. Dad went along with it because it served his ego. They've been basking in the admiration of your imaginary son for over 6 months. I closed my eyes. Even after everything, their capacity for self-deception was staggering. Why are you calling to tell me this now, Preston? Because I was a coward, Natalie. 20 years ago, I should have walked down those stairs. I should have told Dad he was out of his mind. I should have protected my little sister. He stopped, breathing shakily. Mallory and I have talked about it for years. We were terrified of losing our tuition, our standing, our inheritance. We stayed silent, and that silence made us accomplices. Mallory and I are going to be at the anniversary gala on the 15th. If you decide to show up, you won't be standing alone. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing his words. Preston stayed on the line for another hour, describing the oppressive expectations of growing up under Arthur Thorne's thumb, the constant demand for perfection, the emotional withdrawal whenever anyone failed to comply. Mallory has 2 young boys now, Preston added. She's terrified of them growing up in an environment where love is treated like a conditional contract. Why didn't you pick up the phone 5 years ago? I asked. I tried, he admitted in a low whisper. I found your office number online. I dialed it a dozen times. But every single time I hung up before it rang because I knew that if I heard your voice, I would have to look at what I let happen to you. But seeing Mom and Dad drive out to Chicago to try and buy you off like a stage prop, it made me realize that if I don't stand up now, I will carry that shame to my grave. I thought back to the older brother who used to help me with algebra homework at the kitchen table, the boy who taught me how to throw a baseball in the yard before he became consumed by our parents' approval. There's one more thing, Preston said. The church board arranged for the golden anniversary speeches to be live-streamed on the parish's social media page. Pastor Caldwell wanted to showcase their 50-year marriage as an example of Christian family values to the entire diocese. A live broadcast, 200 influential community leaders in attendance, and thousands more watching from their homes. Thank you for telling me, Preston. What are you going to do, Natalie? I'm going to make sure the truth gets heard. Friday morning, November 8th, at 10:14 a.m., my father called my direct line. Natalie, we need your travel itinerary. The gala is 1 week away. $250,000, plus full legal restoration in the family trust. This is our final offer. I spoke with Preston, I said calmly. A beat of rigid silence followed. He explained the grandson you've been boasting about to your peers, I continued. The person you fabricated because you couldn't be bothered to read an article properly. We may have spoken prematurely about the details, my father replied, his tone hardening. That is irrelevant. You are being offered a massive financial settlement to participate in a family milestone. You aren't offering me a reconciliation, Arthur. You're trying to purchase an actress to keep your lie from imploding. You have no standing to lecture us, he snapped, his temper breaking through. You are the one who brought disgrace upon our household when you were 16. I was a terrified child who needed her parents, I answered, keeping my voice entirely measured. And you threw me into the street in the dead of winter and spent 2 decades telling people I didn't exist. If you think $250,000 buys you a clean conscience, you have completely lost your mind. If you refuse to attend this gathering, Natalie, you will be permanently cut off from every resource this family possesses. You already cut me off 20 years ago, I said, and I built a far better life without you than I ever would have had under your roof. We will see about that, he said, and slammed the receiver down. That evening, I sat around my dining table with Chloe and Genevieve. They want an elaborate show, Genevieve said, turning her teacup in her hands. They want you to walk in, smile for the photographers, and validate 20 years of deception. They don't want a daughter, Chloe added. They want a public relations asset. I laid the evidence across the table. The notarized disinheritance letter from 2004, Beatrice Callahan's time-stamped security footage, and the original magazine feature. I'm going to that anniversary gala, I stated quietly. Chloe looked up. Mom, are you sure? I'm not going there to accept their money, and I'm not going there to make a scene out of malice. I am going there so they can never pretend we are invisible again. I want the truth spoken in front of every single person whose opinion they value more than their own flesh and blood. I'm standing on that stage with you, Chloe said firmly. They need to look at the granddaughter they tried to bury. I reached across the table and took her hand. Are you certain you want to face that? I've spent my entire life knowing they chose their social circle over my existence, Chloe replied. I'm ready. I called Preston back that night. Does your promise to stand by us still hold? Mallory and I are ready, he answered. Then do not tell Mom and Dad that we are coming. Saturday, the 15th of November 2024, 6:47 p.m. The grand ballroom at the Columbus Athletic Club was draped in pure extravagance. Tiered crystal chandeliers hung from the coffered ceiling, casting light over white damask table linens, sterling silver place settings, and towering floral arrangements of white hydrangeas and cream roses. Over 200 guests in tailored tuxedos and evening gowns mingled across the parquet floor, sipping champagne and discussing judicial nominations and country club committee seats. I stood in the entryway with Chloe at my side. She wore an elegant midnight blue dress, her shoulders back, her gaze completely steady. I had chosen a sharp, tailored black evening suit, understated, professional, and impossible to overlook. How are you feeling? Chloe whispered. I'm about to walk into my parents' golden jubilee to address 200 strangers, I murmured, squeezing her fingers. I'm nervous. That's normal, she smiled softly. We're in this together. We stepped through the double doors. At the far end of the ballroom stood a raised mahogany dais beneath an arch of white blossoms. A media technician was monitoring a tripod camera that displayed the parish's live social media broadcast, the green transmission light blinking steadily. Standing on the platform were Arthur and Evelyn Thorne. My mother wore an oyster silk gown with diamond pendant earrings. My father was in a bespoke charcoal tuxedo with a satin lapel. They looked radiant, exuding the serene confidence of people who believed their social fortress was entirely unassailable. My father was just approaching the podium to deliver his keynote address. 50 years of marriage has reinforced one fundamental truth above all else. His voice boomed through the ballroom sound system, captured clearly by the live broadcast. A family built on faith, integrity, and discipline can withstand any storm. Evelyn and I have dedicated our lives to serving this community, upholding the values of Christ Church, and raising children who reflect those sacred principles. Polite applause rippled through the ballroom. On the technical monitor beside the dais, the live stream comment section was scrolling with praise from parish members. A pillar of our church, true Christian leadership, congratulations to the Thornes. Then, my mother looked toward the center aisle. Her rehearsed smile froze instantly. Her fingers tightened around my father's forearm with such force that he stopped speaking mid-sentence. He followed her gaze down the carpeted aisle. The murmurs began immediately. Guests turned in their seats, their conversations trailing off as they recognized my face from the magazine profile or saw the unmistakable Thorne family resemblance. "Is that the daughter from the design firm?" Someone whispered from a nearby table. "I thought Arthur said she was working in London," another guest murmured. My father cleared his throat, trying desperately to regain control of the room. As I was stating, family integrity has always been. I walked steadily down the center aisle toward the stage, Chloe keeping pace right beside me. The crowd parted naturally, the atmosphere shifting from celebratory warmth to tense anticipation. Preston and Mallory appeared near the steps of the platform, watching us with solemn, determined expressions. "Nathalie." My father's voice crackled through the microphone, strained and brittle. What a unexpected surprise. We were not anticipating. I mounted the 3 wooden steps to the dais. The camera operator instinctively panned the lens to frame me. I felt the gaze of 200 influential citizens in the hall, alongside hundreds watching the live stream online. "Good evening, Father." Before he could pull back, I calmly took the microphone from the stand. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Thorne. For those of you who don't know me, and most of you do not, I am Arthur and Evelyn's youngest child. The daughter they spent the last 20 years telling you was living quietly in Europe." An absolute hush fell over the room. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. "I did not go to Europe," I continued, my voice calm, clear, and unyielding through the speakers. "On the evening of November 14th, 2004, exactly 20 years ago yesterday, my parents found out that I was pregnant at 16 years old. That very night, they forced me out the front door into a freezing rainstorm with a single suitcase. They instructed their legal team to draft formal disinheritance paperwork, and they told me I was dead to them." A sharp gasp echoed from the front tables. On the monitor screen, the live chat began scrolling at lightning speed. They informed this congregation that I had relocated abroad to protect their standing in this town. For 20 years, they pretended I never existed. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the crisp copies of the original documents. "This is the formal agreement my father sent to me via certified mail 3 days after abandoning me. It explicitly states that I forfeit every legal claim to the Thorne name and estate, and that the family bears no obligation to me, or to quote directly any descendant or issue thereof." I held the notarized signature page directly up to the livestream camera lens, clear enough for anyone on the broadcast to read Arthur and Evelyn Thorne's signatures and the 2004 notary stamp. "That descendant is standing right here. Her name is Chloe." I gestured to Chloe, who stepped up beside me on the platform. "She is your granddaughter, whom you have never once met. The brilliant grandson you have been boasting about to your Rotary colleagues and parish elders for the past 6 months is completely fictional. You invented him from a magazine headline you failed to read, simply to preserve your reputation." My father lunged forward to grab the microphone. "Natalie, this is entirely inappropriate for this venue." "When would be the appropriate time, Arthur?" I held the microphone out of his reach. "When is the right time to speak the truth? Last week, you came to my home in Chicago and placed a check for $250,000 on my table, attempting to hire us to stand here tonight and validate your 20-year lie." I turned to the audience, looking directly into the faces of the city council members, the hospital board, and the congregation elders. "I am not standing here for an inheritance, and I am not here for compensation. I am here because my daughter and I will no longer be erased to preserve an illusion." Pastor Caldwell rose slowly from his seat at the head table. "Arthur, Evelyn, is this the truth?" My father stood paralyzed, his mouth slightly open, incapable of finding words. My mother was weeping openly, her trembling hands smudging the carefully applied makeup she had perfected for the evening. In my entire life, I had never seen Evelyn Thorne cry in front of other people. "Arthur," Pastor Caldwell's voice was stern and uncompromising, "I asked you a direct question. Is what your daughter is presenting accurate?" The entire ballroom held its breath. My father looked across the crowd at the judges, the managing partners, the civic leaders whose respect he had cultivated for half a century. I watched him search frantically for an angle, a legal loophole, a way to spin the narrative. There was none. It was a different era. My father finally stammered into the silence. "We made decisions that we believed were necessary. You threw your teenage child into the street because you cared more about public perception than human life, I said, my tone remaining steady. Preston stepped up onto the dais, followed immediately by Mallory. They stood shoulder to shoulder with Chloe and me. She's telling the absolute truth, Preston stated, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Mallory and I were in the house that night. We watched from the upstairs window as our parents locked our 16-year-old sister out in a storm. We stayed silent to protect our own comfort, and that failure has haunted us for 20 years. The room erupted into a wave of agitated murmurs. Several prominent guests began gathering their belongings. Councilman Miller stood up from his table and walked toward the exit without offering a single word to my father. And if you require further verification, I added, gesturing toward the back row, Mrs. Beatrice Callahan is here tonight. She was our neighbor who opened her door and took me in when my own family shut theirs. She preserved the security logs from that night. Beatrice stood up from her chair, her chin held high, looking Arthur Thorne directly in the eye. The live stream feed was overwhelmed with thousands of incoming comments. The social facade that Arthur and Evelyn Thorne had spent 50 years constructing had evaporated in less than 5 minutes of plain truth. I handed the microphone back to my father. He took it mechanically, staring at it as if he were in a state of shock. I didn't come here to ruin your lives, I told them quietly, so only those on the platform could hear. I came here to reclaim our reality. Then, I turned back to the microphone one last time. 20 years ago, I was cast out with nothing to my name. Today, I am the founder of a thriving design firm in Chicago. My daughter is an honors student at Northwestern University. We built an honorable life without taking a single dollar from the Thorne family. Chloe took the microphone from my hand. My name is Chloe, she said, looking straight into the camera. I am 19 years old. I have spent my entire life knowing that my grandparents chose their social standing over my mother's life and my own. You could have been part of our family. You could have been there for my first steps, my piano recitals, my high school graduation. You chose your reputation instead, and you will never be allowed to rewrite that truth. Chloe handed the microphone back to the stand and took my hand. We walked down the steps together. Behind us, the grand ballroom dissolved into utter disarray. At the threshold of the double doors, I turned back one final time. One last thing, Arthur, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I have no intention of challenging the family trust or demanding a settlement. I am keeping those disinheritance documents not as a weapon, but as a permanent reminder of the difference between genuine family and conditional pride. But make no mistake, if you ever circulate another fabrication about my daughter or me, every single record, timestamp, and sworn statement will be delivered directly to the press. Genevieve Sinclair was waiting by the coat check, a calm smile on her face. Ready to head back? Yes, I answered. As we pushed through the brass exterior doors into the crisp November night, I could hear Pastor Caldwell's voice behind us. Arthur, Evelyn, we need to speak in the conference room immediately. Outside, the autumn air was cold and clean. For the first time in 20 years, the weight that had rested on my shoulders since I was 16 felt completely gone. Mom, Chloe said softly, linking her arm through mine. Did we do the right thing? I thought of the frightened girl standing under the streetlight with a nylon suitcase, terrified of the future. I thought of all the years of quiet determination, building a life from nothing. We spoke the truth, I answered, wrapping my arm around her. We established our boundary, and we let them face the reality of their own actions. That isn't vengeance, Chloe. That is accountability. What do we do now? I looked up at the quiet night sky above the city. Now, we go home. The aftermath unfolded rapidly over the following week. By midnight, the recorded clip of the live broadcast had been shared over 900 times across local social media. By the next afternoon, a local news blog had picked up the story, generating tens of thousands of views across the state. 45 guests had walked out of the anniversary gala within 20 minutes of our departure. Preston called me on Sunday morning with a full account. Councilman Miller had formally severed his association with my father's firm, the hospital foundation had canceled their upcoming dinner, and several long-standing corporate clients had already requested to transfer their legal files. By Tuesday, Arthur Thorne had submitted his resignation as an elder at Christ Church, citing personal family matters. By Thursday, the Regional Legal Ethics Committee announced an internal review regarding character and fitness complaints brought forward by former associates. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, my office was inundated with correspondence. We received over a dozen new commercial inquiries from clients who had read the original design feature and connected it to the viral video. But more than business inquiries, our inbox was filled with heartfelt messages from strangers, individuals who had been alienated by their own families, young parents who had persevered against impossible odds, and people finding the strength to establish boundaries with toxic relatives. The following Saturday, Preston and Mallory took a train to Chicago for their first visit to my home in 20 years. We sat in my living room for hours, talking through the decades of silence. Mallory wept when she embraced Chloe, and Preston brought his 2 young sons, who spent the afternoon playing board games in our sunroom. "I know an apology cannot erase 20 years, Preston said quietly as we sat on the terrace. "No," I replied. "It can't, but it's a genuine beginning." 8 days after the gala, my phone rang from an Ohio number. My mother. Natalie. Her voice sounded smaller, more fragile than I had ever heard it. "I'm not calling to offer excuses. I don't even know how to begin apologizing for what we did." "Then why are you calling, Evelyn?" A prolonged silence hung over the line. "I watched the recording of the gathering," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've watched it over and over. I kept looking at your face, trying to see the daughter I put out into the rain. I said nothing. Your father. He barely leaves his study," she continued. "His partners are stepping away. The parish members won't look him in the eye. He doesn't know how to exist without that image. I didn't do this to destroy him," I said evenly. "I did it because we were done living under your lies. I understand that now." She wept softly. "I called because I realized that after hearing Chloe speak on that stage, after hearing my granddaughter say she grew up knowing we discarded her, I realized I might never hear your voice again." I closed my eyes, taking a steady breath. "I am not ready to forgive you, Evelyn. I don't know if I ever will be. But I won't hang up on you. That is more grace than I deserve," she murmured. We stayed on the line in silence for another minute before she quietly said goodbye. She didn't demand an invitation. She didn't ask for a second chance. Perhaps that was the very first step on an extraordinarily long road. On Thanksgiving 2024, the dining table in my Chicago home, a solid walnut piece I had restored with my own hands, seated 12 people. It had never been so full of life. Chloe sat at my right hand, Genevieve at my left. Beatrice Callahan, who had traveled up from Ohio for the holiday, was showing Mallory's youngest boy how to fold linen napkins into intricate shapes. Preston was carving the roast turkey, while Mallory arranged the side dishes in the kitchen. My parents were not present. We were not at that point, and perhaps we never would be. But looking around that table, I recognized a fundamental truth. I had spent 2 decades grieving a family structure that had only loved a conditional image of who I was supposed to be. Now, I was surrounded by people who chose to be there, people who loved the real, unvarnished person I had become. Chloe stood up, tapping her glass with a silver fork. "I'd like to make a toast to my mom," she said, unfolding a small slip of paper. "When I was little, I used to ask why our family was so small. Mom always told me the honest truth. That people make choices, and those choices aren't a reflection of our worth. It took me years to truly understand the courage that took. Everything I have, and everything I am today, exists because my mother refused to let someone else's rejection define our lives." She raised her glass high. "To the family we build with our own hands." Everyone raised their glasses in unison. Later that evening, after the table was cleared, and the house was filled with the warm murmur of coffee and conversation, I stood by the kitchen window looking out over the city lights. Chloe came up beside me, leaning her shoulder against mine. "Are you happy, Mom?" I looked at my daughter, then out at the life we had pieced together from the remnants of what I thought I had lost 20 years ago. "Yes," I smiled, wrapping my arm around her shoulder. "I truly am."